People think they bring me broken things. Most of the time, they bring me unfinished stories. That is the simplest way to describe what I do. My name is Lily Brooks, and for almost 30 years I have restored documents and objects that time has tried to erase. Letters, photographs, ledgers. The quiet paper trails that outlive the people who made them. Most of what arrives at my workshop holds small secrets. A name in a margin, a date that doesn't quite match. But last March, a leather suitcase arrived from an estate sale in upstate New York, and inside its false bottom, folded with the kind of precision that told me they had been handled hundreds of times, I found 2 first-class tickets for a transatlantic liner, New York to Southampton, England, dated October 9th, 1965, never used. 2 tickets, 1 suitcase, and a passport issued that same year without a single stamp inside it. I have worked on more than 4,000 objects in my career. I have never met one that lied to me as beautifully as this suitcase did. Stay with me until the end, because the last thing I found, sewn into the lining, where it had waited for 50 years, didn't just answer my questions. It changed the meaning of every object I'm about to show you.
Before we open this suitcase together, if quiet stories like this one matter to you, subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next object that arrives here. Leave a like and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. This little community grows one story at a time, and I'd love to know you're part of it.
My workshop sits in an old carriage house in the Hudson Valley. It smells like wheat starch and old leather, no matter the season. There is a ritual here at Vellum. Every piece spent its first night untouched, under muslin. In the morning, I put on the gloves, pull the lamp close, and before any tool touches anything, I sit with it. A few minutes of silence, letting the object tell me what kind of silence it has been keeping. Some silences are accidents. Others are built, constructed and defended for decades by someone who had a reason. The suitcase's silence was built. I knew it before I opened a single lock. The suitcase came from a dealer I've worked with for years. He buys estates, whole lives, sold by the room. When something is too fragile or too fine to move on as is, it comes to me first. His note said only, leather case, 1950s or 60s, structural damage, interesting weight. Interesting weight. Dealers develop an instinct for objects that carry more than they should. This one weighed almost a pound more than an empty case of its size has any right to.
The leather was good, English bridal hide, hand-stitched, the kind of piece a careful man buys once in his life and keeps forever. The brass locks had been polished so many times the plating was worn through to the base metal. Someone had touched this suitcase constantly. But the travel stickers, the scuffs, the honest wear of an object that has actually gone somewhere? None, not one. A suitcase that was held for 50 years and never traveled a single mile. On the leather luggage tag, in careful block capitals, faded but legible, a name, W. Ambrose.
I found the false bottom on the second day. The interior panel was original, but one line of stitching along the base was not. Different thread, different hand, tighter, more anxious. Whoever sewed it wasn't a craftsman. He was hiding something. Under the panel, wrapped in a sheet of tissue gone amber with age, the 2 tickets. First class, stateroom B14, the Meridian, sailing from Pier 86, New York, on the morning of October 9th, 1965. 2 names typed by the shipping line's clerk, Mr. Walter Ambrose, Miss Rosemary Calder. Unused tickets are rare. Ocean liners refunded them. People needed the money. To keep 2 first-class fares, a small fortune in 1965, folded in the dark for half a century, you would need a reason stronger than money. I confess I sat looking at those 2 tickets for a long while before I touched anything else. Then I did what I always do when an object refuses to explain itself. I started with the paper. Whenever a dealer clears an estate, I ask for the paper lot, the boxes of documents nobody bids on. They tell me more than the objects ever do. Walter Ambrose's paper lot arrived 4 days later, 3 shoeboxes. And inside them, standing in neat rows like a library's card catalog, were postcards. 612 postcards. Every single one of them showed London.
Tower Bridge in the rain, Regent Street at Christmas, the reading room of the British Museum, postmen, double-deckers, the Thames at dusk, decades of London, printed and glossy and bright. Not one had been mailed. Not one carried a message. On the back of each card, in the lower corner, in pencil, a date. The first, June of 1966. The last, the autumn of 2013. For 47 years, roughly once a month, Walter Ambrose had acquired a postcard of a city 3,000 miles away.
I spent an entire afternoon just reading the collection the way you'd read a diary, because that is what it was, even if I didn't understand the language yet. The cards were filed in strict chronological order, each one separated from its neighbors by a slip of glassine, archival technique, self-taught almost certainly, but careful, the care of a man protecting something he intended to outlive him. And the choices changed over the years. That's what a collection does. It confesses.
In the 60s and 70s, the cards were grand and public. Buckingham Palace, Piccadilly at night, the city as a stranger sees it. But by the 90s, the cards had become smaller, quieter. A bench in a park in Hampstead, a bakery window in a neighborhood no tourist would name, the reading room of a small library. As if over 30 years of imaginary visits, he had stopped being a tourist there and started being a resident. A man was living one glossy rectangle at a time, an entire parallel life. And here is what stopped me. In the same box, in a plastic sleeve, was his passport, issued August 1965, valid for years, every page blank. The man who collected London for half a century never went to London, never went anywhere.
There was one letter in the boxes, just one, postmarked Rochester, New York, February 1966, from a woman named Helen, his sister, judging by the tone. Most of it was family news, but near the end, one paragraph.
Walter, it has been 4 months. Nobody understands what happened, and you refuse to say a word. The tickets can be exchanged, I asked. You could still go. Whatever she did to you, don't let it take London too.
Whatever she did to you. So that was the story his own family believed. Rosemary Calder had done something to him, something bad enough to cancel the voyage of a lifetime, days before sailing. Something he refused to speak about for the rest of his life. Every document I had seen so far agreed with Helen, and every document was wrong. But I didn't know that yet. What I found next made the abandonment story look even more certain, and it involved money. A great deal of money, moving in only one direction. The second shoebox held receipts. Walter kept everything, and receipts, unlike people, never soften a story to spare your feelings. November 1965 was a brutal month on paper. November 3rd, a bill of sale for a 1962 sedan, sold for less than it was worth. You can tell by the speed of it. November 8th, an estate-grade wristwatch, sold to a dealer on Madison Avenue. The receipt notes the original box and papers. A man who keeps the box and papers loves the watch. He sold it anyway.
November 12th, furniture. Nearly all of it by the inventory list. A dining table, 8 chairs. A bedroom set described as new, unused. A bedroom set, new, unused. Sit with that one the way I did. In the autumn of 1965, a 29-year-old man furnished a bedroom that no one would ever sleep in, and 6 weeks later he sold it at a loss, still wrapped. November 19th, a canceled lease.
A 2-bedroom apartment in a good building near Gramercy Park, signed in September, surrendered in November, with a penalty Walter paid in full, and being Walter, kept the receipt for. He didn't just cancel a voyage, he dismantled an entire future, room by room, in 16 days, and filed the paperwork of its demolition in a shoebox. And then, November 15th, the receipt that seemed to close the case. A credit slip from a jeweler on West 47th Street. Returned, 1 diamond engagement ring. Refund issued in full. I sat back from the table and let the story assemble itself, the way anyone would have assembled it in 1965. At that moment, I thought I already knew the answer. A young man buys 2 first-class tickets and an engagement ring, furnishes a home, plans a crossing to England, a honeymoon, or a new life, or both. And then, days before the ship sails, it all collapses. The ring goes back. The furniture is sold. He never speaks her name again. His sister's version, the neighbor's version probably, the version he allowed everyone to believe until the day he died. She left him. At the bottom of the box was a ledger, gray cloth, water-stained, the kind sold in any stationery store of the era. Walter's handwriting thumbed it, small, upright, disciplined. And from December 1965 onward, 1 entry repeated, the same sum, the first week of every month, month after month, year after year, for 9 years. I added it up twice because I didn't believe it the first time. Taken together, the entries came to more than the price of the house he never bought, and the crossing he never made, combined. 9 years of a young man's life, paid out in identical monthly pieces. The rest of the ledger told me how he did it. The entries around that monthly sum were a portrait of deliberate smallness. Rent on a single room in Yorkville, second-hand shoes resold twice, he recorded the resoling. Lunch amounts that barely qualify as lunch. In 1968, there is an entry for a winter coat, and then nothing in the clothing column for 6 more years. This was not a man who had fallen on hard times. His salary entries were steady. He worked, apparently well, as a draftsman for an engineering firm on Lexington Avenue for 4 decades. This was a man who had chosen hard times, budgeted for them, balanced them to the penny every month against a single letter of the alphabet. And beside every single entry, where a bookkeeper would write a payee, Walter wrote only 1 letter, R. No name, no address, no explanation. A man who documented the sale of his own dining chairs would not tell his own ledger where a decade of his life was going. Money that leaves quietly, every month, for 9 years, is not a debt. It's a devotion. The more I found, the less I understood, and I needed to know who R was. And the answer was already in my hands, inside a plain brown envelope I had set aside on the first day because it was sealed, and sealed things wait until I'm ready. That evening, I was ready. Inside the envelope were medical papers, not Walter's. The first was an admission record from a hospital in Manhattan, dated October 4th, 1965, 5 days before the Meridian was due to sail. The patient's name? Rosemary Calder, R. The diagnosis line I won't read to you in full. It was the kind of diagnosis that, in 1965, was spoken quietly and often not to the patient at all. That detail matters more than any other in this story, and I'll come back to it. Under the admission record, treatment receipts, dozens of them from a specialist clinic spanning 1965 to 1974, 9 years, the same 9 years as the ledger. Every receipt marked the same way, paid, money order. And in the last fold of the envelope, the money order stubs themselves, purchased from post offices all over the city, never the same branch twice in a row. Midtown, Brooklyn, Queens, as if the sender were making very sure that no clerk would ever recognize his face, connect his name, mention it to anyone. Anonymous, systematic, relentless. I mapped the stubs on a city map one evening, the way you'd plot a constellation. 41 different post office branches over 9 years, scattered across 4 boroughs. Some of them were an hour from his room and an hour from his office. He would have given up entire evenings, after 10-hour days, in January cold, in August heat, riding subways to neighborhoods where nobody knew his name, so that a money order would carry no trail back to him. There are easier ways to give money away. Every one of them risks being discovered. He chose the hard way for 9 years because being discovered was the one cost he refused to pay. Walter Ambrose spent nearly a decade secretly funding the treatment of the woman who, as far as his entire world knew, had broken his heart and vanished. One more document. A short letter on a physician's letterhead dated October 2nd, 1965. Addressed not to the patient, addressed to Walter. Because that is how it was done then. In 1965, grave news was routinely given to the family first, to the husband, the father, the fiancé, who were trusted to decide what the patient could bear to know.
Dear Mr. Ambrose, as we discussed by telephone, I must ask you to come to my office at your earliest convenience regarding Miss Calder's results. I would prefer we speak before anything is said to her.
Before anything is said to her. 5 days before the ship sailed, Walter Ambrose sat in a doctor's office and learned that the woman he was about to marry was seriously ill. And she didn't know yet. Hold that sentence for a moment, because everything this man did next, the returned ring, the sold furniture, the silence that let his own sister believe the worst, every one of those documents is about to mean something completely different. The answer was never in the boxes. It was in the suitcase itself. It had been there the whole time, under my hands, inside the lining, sewn shut by the same anxious thread I'd noticed on the very first day and told myself I'd get to later. I got to it on a Tuesday morning, with the workshop very quiet. Restoring a lining means removing it. As the old silk came away from the frame, I felt it, a flat rectangle, sewn between the layers, positioned exactly where the false bottom's hidden panel would press against it. The tickets on one side, this on the other. 50 years, face to face in the dark. A single envelope. No name, no stamp. I want to be honest with you about something. I opened it with a steadiness I did not feel. 30 years of training keeps the hands calm. Nothing keeps the rest of you calm. Because by then I already suspected what this was, and there are moments in this work when you become the first witness a secret has had in half a century, and you feel the weight of being chosen for it by nothing more than accident and thread. Inside, 4 pages, dated October 8th, 1965, the night before the sailing. The handwriting was the same small, upright hand from the ledger, but it deteriorated as it went, steady on the first page, leaning by the second, and by the last page pressed so hard into the paper that 50 years later my fingertips could still read it from the back, like Braille.
My Rosemary. By the time anyone reads this, if anyone ever does, I hope you have hated me for many years. I hope it worked. Hatred is a strong rope, and I needed you tied to something, because I could not tell you what I knew. Dr. Whitfield called me on Saturday. I have known for 6 days what you do not know yet. Tomorrow or the day after they will tell you, and your mother will be beside you, and your sisters, and the whole city that loves you. That is how it must be. Here, not on a ship in the middle of an ocean.
If I had told you the truth, you would have refused everything rather than let me pay for it. Don't pretend otherwise. I know you. So I did the only thing I could think of that you would never forgive. I will not write down what I said to you on Thursday. I have to live with having said it. That is my share of the price, and I pay it gladly. I am keeping the tickets, not as regret, as proof that the voyage existed, that for one autumn that life was real, and it was ours, and I chose to trade it. A man should keep the receipt for the most expensive thing he ever purchased. What I purchased is your life. Go on hating me, Rosemary. It kept you alive. W.
He never mentions the money, not once in 4 pages. but you already know where it went. You watched it leave, month by month, in a gray ledger, beside a single letter of the alphabet. He didn't need to explain it to her. He had already explained it to no one for 50 years. Folded inside the letter were 2 newspaper clippings. The first, from 1971, a wedding announcement. Rosemary Calder, fully recovered, married a schoolteacher from Long Island. The clipping was soft at the edges, the way paper gets when it is held often. The second, from the autumn of 2013, her obituary. 3 children, 7 grandchildren, 48 years of a life that, according to a hospital admission form from October 1965, was never supposed to happen. I went back to the shoeboxes and checked the postcards one more time. The last postcard of London, the 612th, was dated 4 days after her obituary. After that, nothing, ever again. The dealer's records say Walter Ambrose died in the spring of 2015, in the same rented room in Yorkville, at 89. The estate notice ran to 4 lines, no survivors listed, which wasn't quite true. His sister's grandchildren existed somewhere, which is how the suitcase ended up at auction. 18 months, that's how long he outlived her. A man can keep a promise going for a very long time, but he cannot outlive its purpose by much. I had been reading the postcards wrong from the beginning. Everyone would have. 600 cards of a faraway city look like longing, like a man mourning the trip he never took, torturing himself with pictures of it. But Walter wasn't mourning London, he was visiting it. Once a month, the same week, I realized that the money orders went out. He would buy a postcard, pencil the date on the back, and file it away. 1 card, 1 payment. 1 imagined street for every month she stayed alive. The postcards weren't grief, they were the crossing itself, taken slowly, on foot, in his mind, for 47 years. He never needed the ship. He had traded the ship for something he clearly considered a better view. And when she died, when there was no one left on the other side of that ocean of his own making, he stopped traveling. 4 days after her obituary, the last card. The passport stayed blank because the destination was never really London. The destination was her. And once I understood that, every object on my table changed in front of me, the way a photograph changes when you finally learn who's standing just outside the frame. The returned ring was not a heartbreak. It was the down payment. The unused bedroom set was not an embarrassment sold off quickly. It was an operating room, a specialist's fee, a January of treatment. The sister's letter, whatever she did to you, was not an accusation that went unanswered out of pride. It went unanswered because answering it would have undone everything. His silence wasn't a wound. It was the last wall of the structure, and he held it for 50 years, against his own family, against his own name, against every dinner table where people quietly called him the man who got left. He let them. I keep thinking about the wedding announcement, soft at the edges from handling. In 1971, he read that she was marrying someone else, that the plan had worked completely, that she was healthy and loved and permanently beyond his reach, and his response was to keep the clipping where he could hold it. Most of us want credit for far smaller things than a life. He wanted her to have the life, and someone else to get the credit, and history to record him as the coward. On paper, it does. That's why paper needs restorers. I finished the restoration in early summer. It took longer than the damage required. I admit that freely. There are objects you work slowly on purpose, because finishing them means saying goodbye, and I wasn't ready. New silk lining, matched to the original, I sourced it from a mill that still weaves on 1950s looms, because he would have noticed the difference, and by then his opinion mattered to me. The leather fed and stabilized over 6 careful sessions. The anxious line of stitching along the false bottom, the one that first told me an amateur had hidden something here, I photographed, documented, and then preserved exactly as it was. A conservator's rule, and a personal one. You repair damage. You do not repair evidence of love. The locks I cleaned, but did not overpolish. I left the wear. The wear was his. 50 years of a thumb finding the same brass clasp, evening after evening, opening a suitcase that was never going anywhere, just to make sure the tickets were still there, still real, still proof. You do not polish that away. You'd be erasing the only voyage he ever took. And then I did something I have done only a handful of times in 30 years. I put everything back. The 2 tickets in the false bottom where his hands had placed them. The letter sewn into the lining. My stitches beside his anxious ones. A dozen postcards. The 2 clippings side by side. The dealer asked why I didn't remove the contents for separate sale. Paper like that has a market. I told him some objects aren't containers. Some objects are testimony. You don't empty a testimony. Somewhere, right now, that suitcase is sitting in someone's collection, holding a love story that was performed for 50 years for an audience of no one. Now it has an audience. You. Here is what Walter Ambrose taught me. Not every sacrifice leaves a visible scar. There are people who quietly set down their own future to protect someone else's, and never ask to be understood, never ask to be thanked, never once correct the story the world tells about them. The greatest love stories may be the ones nobody ever hears, because the people who lived them chose silence. People think I restore objects. I don't, not really. I restore memories. And every one of them, if you hold it up to the light long enough, is trying to tell you the truth. If this story touched something you recognize in your own life or in someone you love, I'd love for you to become part of the Vellum of Life community. Subscribe and turn on notifications so the next object finds you. Leave a like and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I truly love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you carry a story like this one, yours or one you inherited, you can send it to me privately at vellumoflife@gmail.com. Your privacy will always be protected. Names, cities, every identifying detail can be changed. Every story deserves dignity. Thank you for sitting with me at this table. The next object is already waiting. Until then.